Well, good afternoon or good morning, depending on when you're watching our rebroadcast or our take 2 of the sermon that got interrupted by our technology this morning. But the sermon is part 4 of a series we're calling Truth and Dare. And that is a play on the game that many of you probably played when you were younger, where you went around the room and everyone took turns either having to answer a question truthfully and revealing a truth about themselves, usually something embarrassing, or to take a dare, in which you were usually asked by your friends to do something really, really stupid. So we're taking that idea and we've put it in this series as we journey through the book of John, and we're calling it Truth and Dare. So not only do we want to look to the scriptures for God to reveal a truth, but based on that truth, we're wanting to take dares. We're wanting to issue dares for us to take ourselves and for you to take, to step forward and be active in your faith. Now this morning we're going to be looking at John chapter 6. And before we get into the scriptures, I'd like to start with something I saw while I was home visiting family last week. As I was driving to Popeyes, home of the greatest chicken sandwich on earth. I know this may not be Christian of me, and maybe this is a confession, but yeah, it's if you eat the Popeyes chicken sandwich, you're going to know God exists, because only an all-wise, all-knowing, all-intelligent, all-powerful God can make something so absolutely delicious possible. Not to take anything away from the culinary artists that work for Popeyes, but I'm so glad God inspired them with this chicken sandwich. But anyways, on my way there, I noticed a billboard. It had 3 different signs on it. It was multi-layered, right? There was 3 rectangular signs, and the bottom 2 caught my attention. I couldn't tell you what was on the top one. But the second one was an advertisement for a place to go work out, a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week gym that was open all hours of the day, all days of the week, for people who wanted to go work out and to get fit and to get in shape, right? And to burn off calories from eating too much food, or at least what they think was too much food, right? Some people undereat. That is not a sin that I wrestle with. But right under that, very ironically, was an advertisement for an all-you-can-eat buffet. Now, I remember growing up, you know, restaurants used to specialize in one kind of a food or another. You know, there were fish restaurants that I loved to go to that were all-you-can-eat. Sometimes they would even bring it to you. You didn't even have to get up and get it yourself from the bar. Here in Owensboro, we have Moonlight Barbecue. But it used to be where you would go to Kentucky Fried Chicken and you could eat what they specialized in. You know, you could go to Pizza Hut and get what they specialized in. And there were Chinese buffets and Mexican food buffets. And then, man, I never will forget the first time I walked into Orion's. Have you ever been to Orion's? And that buffet has everything. And it's actually all pretty well done. I mean, there's steak and fish and chicken and pasta and pizza. I mean, you name it, it's there. But the one thing I never encountered, and I'm very, very glad, and here's a disclaimer, if you're currently eating dinner, you may want to pause here. If you're getting ready to eat dinner, you may want to pause here and watch this later. But I never, as I went through the buffet line, and the little containers of food, and they usually had labels out in front telling you what they are or above them, I never ran across one that said human flesh. And it's probably a good thing, because that would have been a terrible business idea. So as we look at John chapter 6, and I promise you I am going somewhere with that. So I'm going to look at John chapter 6, first 6 verses. And we'll continue on through there from there. But it reads like this. After these things, Jesus went over the Sea of Galilee. And it's obviously referring back to the signs and wonders and miracles and all the things that he had done in the 5 chapters previous and all that had been explained, which is the Sea of Tiberias. And then a great multitude followed him, because they saw his signs which he performed on those who were diseased. And Jesus went up on the mountain, and there he sat with his disciples. Now the Passover, the feast of the Jews, was near. Then Jesus lifted up his eyes, and seeing a great multitude, thousands and thousands of people, he said to Philip, where shall we buy bread that these may eat? But this he said to him to test him, for he himself knew what he would do. And I just love the way that Jesus taught and asked rhetorical questions. And the main reason I like that is because it was not me who felt foolish, or it was not me who was being tested, even though God does, in fact, test us. But it's always interesting when Jesus answered a question, he would answer the question with a question, and he never asked a question because he needed the information. You know, come meet the man who told me everything I ever did. Right? Jesus already had all the information, but the questions he asked to test him. And Philip answered him. In verse 7, 200 denarii worth of bread is not sufficient for them, that every one of them might have a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, there's a lad here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish, but what are they among so many? And all of the paintings we see of this, if you've ever seen paintings of this scenario, you see the young boy happily giving Jesus' posse his fish and his bread. But actually what we don't know is, hey, you know, they were kind of surrounded by these guys, and it's like, hey, you have food, right? Everybody here is hungry. What are you going to do? You know, so the pressure was on. But the most important thing that happened here was that Andrew, right, he found someone and he brought them to Jesus. We can quickly overlook that when based off what the context of the whole passage is. This is definitely not the focal point of it, but it's one of the most important things in there. Verse 10, then Jesus said, make the people sit down. Now there was much grass in the place, so the men sat down in a number of about 5,000, right? So they had 2 fish and 5 loaves of bread and about 5,000 people to feed. And Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to the disciples, and the disciples to those sitting down, and likewise of the fish as much as they wanted. They got the all-you-can-eat buffet. And I'm assuming that the distance they had to walk to go to and from here, they probably got the 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week workout. I don't know about 7 days, but I'm sure they had to do quite a bit of walking to get there. So they got free food, but that wasn't what they wanted. Now, I'm sure there were some people that had seen the healing miracles who were maybe sick or suffering from a disease that wanted to be healed by Jesus. But Jesus was constantly trying to redirect their attention from a physical bread that spoils, just like we talked about last week with the Samaritan woman at the well. Jesus said, hey, I'm thirsty, give me a drink. And they got into talking about everlasting water, right? Water springing up to eternal life, water of which you can drink from, in which you will never grow thirsty again. Well, here we are 2 chapters later, and we're still on my favorite subject, food, bread and fish. I love fish. I know there are a lot of fish eaters out there, and those of you who aren't, I am so sorry. But after they enjoy this all-you-can-eat buffet, here's what happens. So when they were filled, he said to his disciples, gather up the fragments that remain so that nothing is lost. Therefore they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with the fragments of the 5 barley loaves which were left over by those who had eaten them. And then those men, when they had seen the sign that Jesus did, said, this is truly the prophet come into the world. Therefore, when Jesus perceived that they were about to come and take him by force and make him king, he departed again to the mountain by himself alone. Jesus says later, close to the time of during the time of his trial, he says to Pilate, "Hey, my kingdom is not of this world." When he's standing next to the governor, next to the king, next to the politics, Jesus was like, "You know what? No, thank you. My kingdom is not of this world. The mission I have here is a spiritual one, and it is a greater one." Right? But the people are thinking this, hey, this is our new politician, right? This is my guy. This is the person we've been waiting for to come along and to take over, to rule, to kick out these filthy Romans, right? We're going to take him, we're going to march into Jerusalem, we're going to take this thing back over here, because this is the guy, this is the Messiah. He's going to kick butt and take names. But that wasn't what he had come to do. And he isolated himself from them. But there was a reason that they followed him out into the middle of nowhere. Whether it was for that which the Scripture says, and also there were probably people that followed him out because they had seen the signs and the wonders. And not only did they walk all the way out there, they got treated with an all-you-can-eat buffet. Verse 22 of John 6 reads like this. On the following day, when the people who were standing on the other side of the sea saw that there was no other boat there, except the one that which his disciples had entered, and that Jesus had not entered the boat with his disciples, but his disciples had gone away alone. However, other boats came from Tiberias, near the place where they ate bread, after the Lord had given thanks. When the people therefore saw that Jesus was not there, nor his disciples, they also got into boats and came to Capernaum, seeking Jesus. And when they found him on the other side of the sea, they said to him, Rabbi, when did you come here? Now here's a couple of things we know for sure. The people were looking for a new political leader. They were looking for a king. They were looking for someone they could take over and rule over them in a physical sense. Now they're also looking probably for free food, right? They just had an all-you-can-eat buffet, right? Hey, Jesus, if we follow Jesus, hey, those who eat of the bread of life, they will never go hungry. Well, it's like, if we just follow this guy around, we'll never go hungry. We get food, we get bread and fish, all we can eat. And hopefully, maybe there's some quail or there's some, right? If you think back to the Old Testament. But it wouldn't have been long, and Jesus probably knew that eventually, like all of us, that they were blown away by what Jesus was able to do with 2 fish and 5 loaves. But Jesus knows, because he'd seen it throughout all of history. If they follow him around long enough, pretty soon it's going to be more bread, more fish. Right? So Jesus, perceiving all of this, tried to redirect their attention. Jesus answered to them and said, Most assuredly I say to you, you seek me not because you saw the signs, but because you ate of the loaves and were filled. Right? Jesus, hey, this guy is a conquering king. He does all these signs and wonders, plus there's free food involved. But he says, Do not labor for food which perishes, but for the food which endures to everlasting life, which the Son of Man will give you, because the Father has set his seal on him. Now they liked what they heard, and they wanted to come back. Now I'm going to jump forward. During the midst of all this, we have this amazing story of Jesus walking on the water, right? But as we're getting ready to see, it doesn't take very long that the grumbling and the complaining actually starts. Verse 41, the Jews had then complained about him because he said, I am the bread which came down from heaven. And they said, Is not this Jesus, the son of Joseph, whose father and mother we know? How is it then that he says, I have come down from heaven? Right? One minute, he's this amazing guy. He's this Messiah, that he's going to be the conquering king. And it doesn't take long, and they're complaining already. It doesn't take long with bread and fish. Like, what else you got for me? All right? I've already seen this trick. Jesus therefore answered and said to them, Do not murmur amongst yourselves. No one can come to me unless the Father who sent me draws him, and I will raise him up at the last day. It is written in the prophets, and they shall be taught by God. Therefore, anyone who has heard and learned from the Father comes to me. Now, there are many people who are following for very specific reasons. The Bible illustrates the main 2, but there are probably a few more, I would guess. Don't know that for sure. But Jesus is saying, hey, listen, nobody, and he says many other times, nobody can come to me unless it's given by my Father. My Father has inspired you to come and to hear the good news of the gospel, to hear about the kingdom of heaven, to hear these spiritual truths that will bring you life, right? To bring you face to face with God himself, if you're willing to look through your desires and look through the way you think things should be and see that. And we'll skip down to verse 53. Then Jesus said to him, Most assuredly I say to you, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in you. Whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood has eternal life, and I will raise him up in the last day. For my flesh is food indeed, and my blood is drink indeed. He who eats my flesh and drinks my blood abides in me, and I in him. And as the living Father sent me, and and I live because of the Father. So he who feeds on me will live because of me. This is the bread which came down from heaven, not as your fathers ate the manna and are dead. He who eats this bread will live forever. Now, this is a sermon that only Jesus could pull off. This is the sermon that gets the pastor fired. Right? You preach this amazing sermon. Now, this pastor, this teacher, he just gives us this profound teaching. And actually, there are signs and miracles that are starting to happen. And the church grows and grows, and 5,000 people show up to this church service, right? And they hear the sermon, right? Hey, church growth, man, 0 to 5,000 and nothing flat. I remember one time, and I'm going to change a few of these details because specifically about someone, but I just remember going to hear a pastor I think quite a bit about, right? A pastor teacher I think quite a bit about. And just gave this really passionate, concerning message about how he was concerned about the church and how the church is dying, which, we're definitely remain in a crisis situation as far as how the church is shrinking in our country. But it was really passionate, it was really heartfelt, and very, very moving for me. But I heard someone a couple of rows down from me look at the person next to them, and I'm assuming it's someone they had brought. It's something that they'd been bragging on this guy, and just kind of looked at him and apologized and said, "I'm sorry. He's usually really funny, and he's got all these really cool stories, and I don't know. I hope you're not disappointed." But this is the one. This is the story. If you read in the other Gospels, there are people who are like, they heard Jesus say this, and they're like, "Yeah, I've been tricked into something that's not. No, thank you. No." So I want to talk a little bit about a story, a real life story. You can watch the film. I haven't seen it myself. I do know the gist of the story. It's a movie called Alive, where a rugby team is in a plane crash, and the plane crashes, and unfortunately, a lot of the members of the team die, but a lot of the rest of them survive. But they crash on this mountaintop, right? And it's winter. So it's winter, it's cold. They build a shelter in the fuselage of the plane, and there's not much food left. I mean, you can only survive on peanuts and Coca-Cola for so long. And they come to this realization, like, there's going to be no food. There's going to be no way to get off this mountain. There's no way that anybody can come rescue us until spring. And there's no food. And then someone has the idea, and they look, and here are their teammates. The dead bodies of their teammates. And in order for them to live, they gotta, and this is not a sermon about how you should break taboo, but man, eating other people, I mean, you know how you feel right now, and the way I feel right now is gross. It's just as hideous as it sounds. There's a story in the Old Testament, if you look in 2 Kings chapter 6, that illustrates this too. If you read the first part of chapter 6, it talks about this wonderful feast that happens. But after the siege of Jerusalem and the people were in captivity, there was a great famine in the land, and the people were hungry and starving. And there's a woman that comes to the king and says, "Hey, listen, I'm starving. I have nothing to eat, and so are you. Today, let's take your child, and let's boil him and eat him. And then tomorrow we'll have mine." So the king sacrifices his own son, and they boil him, and they eat him just to live and to survive. And then when it's time for the woman to return the favor, she disappears. Now, these are unsettling stories. These are stories that we read through in the Bible, and we're like, yeah, I don't want to really bring those up. I want to kind of forget about those. That's unbelievable. Gross, right? For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever should believe in him should not perish but have everlasting life. This is my blood of the new covenant. This is the blood that washes away all sin. This is the bread of life. Can you imagine how the parents of the children that passed away felt? Like, not only did they lose their children, in a plane crash. But when they asked, hey, what about the bodies? Can you imagine hearing that story? But there had to be, and I'm assuming there was, a parent or two who got it. Who grieved over the death of their child and had a profound and a very significant loss, but were then able to see the illustration, to think, if my son hadn't have died, these other people couldn't have lived. And sometimes we can think when we lose somebody important to us. I'm sure there are parents who have mourned, who have thought, hey, why didn't God take me instead? So I'm going to leave you there. I'm going to leave you with this thought about what Jesus did, and that how his life that he gave, that his death on the cross, that his flesh and his blood, and what that means as far as eternity goes. You see, later he goes up on top of the mountain, and that's the dare for this week, is to read the last 10 verses of John 6 for yourself for the conclusion. That's why I want to just leave you here with this thought of the story of alive and finding human flesh in a buffet. I know that's I know how it makes you feel. But I want you to read the last 10 verses for yourself. I want you to pray. Here's the dare. I want you to read the last 10 verses. I dare you. And I dare you to ask God to show you something uncomfortable that is going to help you get through it. That God is going to reveal to you the explanation of what is going on here. Because see, the disciples, it's a little bit of a spoiler alert, they go up to him on the mountain, and he explains that in clear language to just his 12 people. And I can only imagine them thinking, it's like, our church was 5,000 people. And then you give this, and everybody leaves, and now you want to explain it in a way that we can understand. Right? They got free food, but that's not what they wanted. Jesus redirected their attention from a bread that spoils into a bread that springs up into eternal life. So again, I dare you, read the last 10 verses and pray that God will reveal to you the truth that he wants to reveal to you there. God bless you, and I will see you next week.